how was your education in the earliest form a bit different from what you feel is being fed to uh, the city people at the moment in a way? Because it feels like it's literally them who are causing a lot of the trouble, I think.
I mean, my own upbringing was it was basically under the socialism, communism of basically at that time dying Yugoslavia, right? Like we had to pledge allegiance to the great leader in the beginning of every day. Um, but like at the same time, the whole establishment was losing its its strength, and people kind of recognize that the country is not running well, that the system that has been hoped for and imagined is highly dysfunctional. So it was strange, right? Like it's almost like you're um like in your young years, you're seeing the coming of the winter. And then, clearly enough, there was a civil war, and had like battles in my town, and enemy helicopters flying over the house, and we were running into the basement, and there was no television for a couple of days because the enemy planes blew up the transponders. Like, was not many people died, right? Like, but it definitely was a war. Like, I didn't know if my father would ever come back. We didn't hear from him for 2 weeks or whatever, and he was there like himself, trying to keep his soldiers alive. Like, some of them were eager. They wanted to go and fight, and he was like, wait, you don't have weapons. um
It's what would you say? Like that's for two things that I would like to unpack here. Is one, I met somebody here recently in Berlin who there's a club. It's called Berghain. It's like this underground techno club in a way, and it's very hard to get in, and it's really prominent. And I asked her what was the lesson she learned from that club, and she said that everything is a social experiment. And communism was by many means also a social experiment that somehow gets rebooted over and over again. What was that? What impact do you feel like this had on your area or your family in a way? Because it feels that many people are, particularly intellectuals, I'm in Berlin. So Berlin is a hardcore leftist uh, stronghold still. Like there's statues of Marx everywhere, and there's statues of Stalin, and there's with 30 meters tall still, and all these kind of things. So it's like the ghosts of the past are still very alive in this place. What would you tell to somebody of maybe who hasn't seen the end of that social experiment where it leads, and what impact did it have to you personally and to your family, you would say?
to me, what's one of the points that was like the breaking point for me, right, was when my savings vanished, and they vanished because of hyperinflation. And I was bringing my savings to school, and keeping it in the school bank, and so on, and at some point I was just like, I would like my money back, and like, well, here is basically nothing. And I'm like, guys, like, real banks have interest rates, and you you know what did you do with my money? And they were like, well, like, we bought the sound announcement system, with the interest. I'm like, but this isn't fair, right? Like, so this is really like the essence of the systems, right? Like, at some point, they're no longer fair, and when they're no longer fair, they lose the support. Now, the challenge is, like, what do people think is fair, and what is their model of reality? Um, so, but like, when it comes to money, like, people are pretty hardcore and like have a pretty kind of grounded understanding. So when your money's wiped out, you feel robbed, and then you stop supporting the system that led to it.
What is something, how do you feel? What does money mean in this context? Because I feel it's not just resources. It seems there is an underlying meaning attached to it as well.
I mean, at that time I was a kid, right? Like I saw pledging allegiance to a leader that died as if there is, nothing present. It's like pledging allegiance to the past. We knew that like the richest people were the truck drivers who were stealing the fuel and then selling it, because there were no consequences to bad acts. And then when the system actually did collapse, like everyone became pro-democratic, right? Like and to some extent this ensured the continuity of the communist leaders that then kind of privatized the public wealth that basically got the government provided housing for very cheap, and in some sense there was this huge privatization where people who already had a lot kept it and was now their own. So some of the greatest injustices happened actually after the transition to democracy, where the people that were before like kind of serving the socialist system, which wasn't perfect, but I mean to some extent it was somewhat just. The end result was basically just this privatization, and there was a bit of respect for the system by these folks, but like their kids kind of forgot what happened, and are now like praising this leftist leaders, while at the same time like their private wealth, right, that funds their lifestyle, was pretty much stolen from the people.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of like paradoxical, but like there is this long-lasting intuition. Some people call it anacyclosis. So it goes back to Aristoteles, and then Machiavelli wrote about it, and it's basically this idea that first there is a kingdom, but then it becomes corrupt and turns into a tyranny. So then the tyranny is taken down by the aristocracy, who set up a new system, a republic. But then it becomes inbred and it becomes an oligarchy. And then an oligarchy is brought down and is replaced by a democracy. But then democracy loses its principles and it becomes an ochlocracy, which is mob rule, almost anarchy. It's like anyone can be a leader as long as they're sufficiently persuasive. And then in this chaos, people kind of like elect a king who's going to basically create order again. And states in the past have been cycling in the system. So the one of the cool things about the U.S. Constitution is that like they understood that, like they drew a lot of inspiration from this problem of the cycling between good king, bad king, good republic, bad republic, good democracy, bad democracy, and they tried to basically make all of these coexist at the same time. So you've got the president that's a bit like a king, you've got the Senate that's a bit like the aristocracy, and you've got the House, which is a bit like a representative of the popular opinion, right? And these things kind of hold each other in balance. But with the sufficiently large amount of ideology and populism and memes and chaos and detachment from reality and truth, you basically get the cycling again, because you break apart the this kind of layering of this independent foundations of governance. So I think right now we live in an environment that's kind of like ochlocracy, and we don't quite have the benefit of having a functioning king or a functioning aristocracy.
So one of the questions I have for this is, what do you believe will happen next? I want to go circle back a little bit. One of the reasons why I'm doing my current project is also because of it's my way of coping with loss and dealing with uncertainty. And my father's from Lebanon, and they've had, man, is there any area in the Middle East that has been longer stretches for civil war and chaos than that area? It seems there's always fighting over there. And for me, experiencing fear of my father's life has been motivating me to create a platform potentially where you can even talk to people after they're gone in some form. What did it did to you that your father had these experiences? And because I sometimes feel there's certain nexus events, like with a superhero, for instance, where them going through particular stuff in the earliest chapters set them up to acquire particular superpowers later on. Think of Batman losing his parents or Spider-Man getting bitten by the spider. What do you think did it to you as a human being that your father had exposure to war, both on the good and the bad side, so to say? Because it feels that this modern generation is they know the word for what war is on paper, but I feel unless you've seen it, it's a foreign concept that just gets forgotten. And one of the problems I would like to solve with this podcast and our platform and supporting everybody who's working is that we don't make the same mistakes over and over again. Because it feels to me that we're through our technological advancement, can't afford these cycles anymore. Have you seen there's a movie called, I think it's like with Denzel Washington. It's like he's in a submarine and they're having a discussion on the board on whether they should fire nuclear weapons or not. And there's one quote I really like, that since the atomic age, war has become the enemy of mankind, not other tribes that we are battling with in a way. And it seems to us that we can't just play the same game anymore, and they need to evolve out of it a little bit. So my question would be, how did war affect your family and you personally also through the experiences that your father went through, if I may ask that?
It's so many things that happen, but maybe another relevant point is that by the age of 15 I left home. I went to a different country. I managed to win a scholarship and went to an international high school with 200 kids, pretty small high school, but these 200 kids were from 70 countries. So, in some sense, I wasn't really planning to emigrate, but at the same time, just going from like one context, right, and one group of people that are growing up in a particular system to kind of going to a completely different system. And then, coming back, I never really felt like I'm aligned. I became kind of this strange particle that like no longer, properly plugs in. And, that kind of like puts you on a quest. The joke is like you marry well, you have a happy life, and you marry badly, you become a philosopher. So in some sense, this journey of seeing other ideas and other cultures and other perspectives kind of made me a bit of a permanent misfit. I guess I was too proud to just like bend my back to the system. But at the same time, I was a kid. I was whatever, 18, 19, 20. Like I wasn't like gonna have my own mob to set the rules. So this has been really my journey. It's not like I'm a
Yeah.
continuation as much of my family. In a way, I went on this journey, and this journey changed me.
It's one of the reasons what I found so interesting is my company is called Alexandrian, and it's partly inspired by the Alexandrian spirit of not bowing down to anybody. And it's like I always think of this scene. There's a Zack Snyder action flick, 300. Have you seen it? And there's it's one great scene of that movie where Xerxes, the tyrant who tries to bring his empire to Greeks, like says like, "I'm gonna make you king of all Greece and give you all these things, but you just have to bow." And he says, Leonidas says like, "I would love to, but there's a cramp in my back. I can't do it today." And I feel that this inability to submit to systems is part of what makes this Alexandrian spirit uh, important for humanity. How did you become a person pretty much who became a leader and was able to stand up for his own thoughts, or as you said, a misfit, because it feels that it's really the misfits who save the world and who speak the truth and who will not bow down to the nonsense, the tyranny, the social experience that we are running constantly.
I often think it was a big mistake. I think life would have been much better if I just bow down. But by the way, speaking of bowing, a couple of weeks ago I was in Vietnam, and one of the things that really struck me, apart from it's a great country, but the thing that really struck me is that in 46, the emperor stepped down and became an advisor to a communist government. And then a bunch of other things happened and so on. But the whole idea, right, of a gentle succession, when the world changes, when the environment changes. And it was this government, right, that didn't want the war against somehow kind of Western supported alternative government in the South. But after after the war was decided, it wasn't like some sort of a genocide or destruction of ideas. Yeah, I mean, it's a communist country, but there is still an ability to think differently. People aren't being persecuted, right? So basically, the lesson here is that you can have relatively gentle transitions from very different systems. And it's usually the ability of a country to basically undergo this transition in a soft, gentle way that maximizes its potential in the future.
I loved going to Vietnam. It's been a great country to visit. I was there 2 years ago, and I was just fascinated how you can still feel the clash of these systems through all the art and museum that has been preserved. And one of the things I would like to ask you is, I think a good question always to ask is when visiting a country or when even meeting an individual, is like, who is that person worshiping? Because bowing down to something is not necessarily a bad act, but it can also be that you're in the presence of having your values properly calculated. And one of the reasons why my father named me Daniel, there are stories in the Bible, for instance, of this spirit or this prophet who was called by the emperor Nebuchadnezzar, who was like a tyrant, and was asked to bow down to along with some other felons, and he wouldn't do it. And because of it, he was thrown into a cave with lions, pretty much to say. And it's I always love the idea that certain people are just inability to worship humans by themselves. And maybe there's something wrong with this hero worship that is, for instance, going on in America too, because it feels that if we, for instance, don't worship something that is greater than the sum of humanity itself. We pick idols or emperors or tyrants or sports stars or celebrities or TikTokers, but it seems that it needs to be always something we bow down to. And you, as somebody who was touched by communism, for instance, or the family before you, one of the things I always find fascinating about being here in Berlin is all these statues. It's like for a system that was apparently everybody's equal. There's a lot of statues of these ideologues in a way who ran this. What do you make of this personality code that occupied socialism so very much, and still in many areas in Thailand has the same personality code also. When was in Thailand, for instance, and there's a picture of the king in every cab, and before the movie in the cinema drives you, so you wish the king well. And what do you make of it, and how do you feel, how does this personality code, this personality worship affect you through your experience with communism?
I think people have been living in an environment that is somewhat hierarchical for a very long time, right? Like, was it the tribal leader? Was it a king? Was it whatever? Like, this has existed for a long time, right? But the question is, how do we interpret that, and who are the leaders? And our kind of historic understanding has been that that the entity to be um, praised or um, respected as human, right? And then successful, historically looking, successful religions have kind of redirected a part of this worship to um, gods, spirits, and in that sense, they when you use this like human psychological tendency to follow, right? You can kind of create a system where people don't follow other people, but where people follow ideas or values, right? Like, the Greek and Roman gods were, gods of values. And, in many ways, it's kind of helpful to kind of think like, hey, I'm going to be praying to this particular god who, that represents this particular virtue or this particular ability. And then when you go to Christianity, right? Like, for example, the whole notion of saints, or even the Holy Trinity, right? Like these are, in a way, more specific, more granular, values, virtues that you basically pay attention to. Now we come to communism, right, and socialism and so on. So a lot of this ideological movement has been kind of breaking away with the past in a potentially violent way. Like just slaughtering the family of the Russian emperor, or the destruction of religion, where it was untenable to be both a member of the Communist Party and go to church. Right. So in some sense, like you see this tendency to accumulate power, and at some point you don't get power based on your virtue or your value, and if you still want more power, the way you do it is by destroying the reputation, sometimes unfairly, usually unfairly, of something else. Right? Like, so at some point it becomes this destructive element of gaining power at the expense of existing sources of power in the society. So communism, to be able to kind of do their thing, they had to keep going. They had to remove the emperor. They had to remove the elites. They had to remove the large farmers. They had to remove the religion, right? Like they just kept destroying to get ever more power for that ideal, right? Like, and I am seeing this right now with this desire to tear down statues. I mean, I'm okay with tearing down like an ugly, old statue, right? But like to tear down a statue, uh, just for the sake of disagreeing with it, is fundamentally a power play. Because whoever's doing it, they're going to put their own statues instead, and they're going to erase that memory.
It reminds me of gaslighting, like from a personal sense, where you're like, you want to alter the narrative to some point. And I had an interesting point when I would love to also talk about parents a little bit, where I was a very troublesome teenager. I have like a pathological urge to resist any form of authority, whether justified. It's like something I had to learn. And I remember one of my teachers taking me aside when he noticed that I was a little bit of an asshole in regards to my mother. And my mother is this hippie like figure, like wouldn't she's not the most authoritative kind of figure. And he said he gave me a speech pretty much about the idea of honoring the archetype. You criticize the person, but don't make sure to throw away the archetype. And I feel this is also interesting for society, where you can criticize the king as a person, but if we want to dismiss with the whole social construct, also what you're destroying the very social structure that helps us to orient ourselves, and we have to start from scratch. And one of the things that I would find interesting as a person. Have you seen a little bit into the history of Alexander the Great's, your neighbor mother, for instance? And she's been a person of great interest to me. And I feel like one of the things that's interesting for asking for leaders is, who is that person worshiping? What is the city particularly follow of? Because she was a great seducer. For instance, she would seduce Alexander to thinking that he is one of the descendants of the gods and has like a great play to partake in the world. And she was called a follower of Dionysus, like the god of wine, so to say, which was like kind of a. And when you look at the current climate, particularly in the United States, what do you feel is animating those leaders in regards to who are they following? What are they doing in a way? It's a very vague and vague question, but I think my question is trying to get at is the current government seems to be really at war with the old government, and there's no peaceful transition of one baton to the others. What do you make of all that?
Oof, it's really complex. I mean, to some extent, systems evolve and change, and there is a kind of a tendency for this to happen every 100 years or so. And funny enough, when you make a prophecy that like every 100 years there is going to be some sort of a change or rift or so on, then people make it happen simply because they believe in it, right? Like this is the notion of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the weapons in every war are different, right? And we built the internet, right? Like was supposed to connect humanity, and instead it became a tool for demagoguery and for post-reality or post-truth. Like it's fascinating. Like for example, when you look at the world wars of the 20th century, right? Like to a large extent, they were a result of mass communication, mass media, right? Like it was possible for a leader to project their power through the radio and then control large masses of people and kind of throw them into the fire. When you look at the the backgrounds of these great individual leaders, not great as in good, but great as in big. Mussolini was a newspaper editor. So was Stalin. And Hitler was a marketer. He was an ad designer. Like, these were all people that were fundamentally about mass media. And you used mass media for an implementation of their vision.
Alex, I'm 5 minutes away from a place called Lustgarten. It's in Berlin, and it was like I go there every day, and it was like my friend, shout out to you, Asfanjar Malik, CEO of Volvo. He always shows me like pictures, or like he likes to just Google stuff while we are working, and then he shows me a picture of like Hitler standing literally on this great palace giving a speech. There's like torches on left of the side, design this huge religious and environment to invoke the to pretty much animate his followers. And it's so crazy to be so close to where this happened. How do you feel the demagogues of today are using these new tools to shift opinions and to get ahead? How do you feel this original idea of the internet of connecting people? How do you think it's currently being used, and what do you make of what's happening right now in your own world? There's or maybe a better question: have you read The Foundation by Asimov? It's,
Yeah, one of
yeah,
my old favorites.
I love this book. There's a great Apple recently put this to screen, and there's one great thing they did where it's like they had this thing that can predict the future, psychohistory as an artifact, and it shows up like different timelines. And at one point, they predict this great crisis where humanity is potentially going to be wiped out. So, what do you make of the current use of technology, and where do you think we are heading? Like, what is your your prediction onwards, or say, what does your gut feeling say? What visions do you have in regards to this?
The self-fulfilling prophecy is that the internet can connect humans and life in general around a coherent action of a single self-aware ecosystem. Right? Like, we can actually make it. We can create something like this. We can create a planetary level intelligence. And this is really powerful. But kind of going back, and I would recommend reading Asimov, not just watching the TV series. The the other thing is, like, who are the current heroes in the internet? And there is a long history of information war, and I think we are in a kind of a state of an information war with people who know what they're doing, who are shifting and shaping ideas, and trying to propagate it, irrespectively of whether these ideas are worthwhile. Like, usually they're being propagated artificially, even if the ideas themselves might not be particularly good. The other thing that I'm noticing is that there is this the shift to internet video has led to in some sort of hyper production of information. Like, there are people who keep producing, like, a huge amount of content, and this can be tweets, or it can be podcasts, or whatever. But like, what happens then is that to keep track of it, right? Like, people exclude other sources and stop really thinking on their own. And you've got basically, these, so-called influencers that are then becoming the almost like tribal leaders.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the danger is to be to lack this connectivity around yourself, to be receiving too much information from just one source.
I recently reread Viktor Frankl, one of my favorite authors, Jewish therapist who was in Auschwitz and who have seen some of these social experiments like National Socialism play out until the very end. And one of the things that he warned about was the corruption of the idols of a generation in a way. And then when I look at my current generation, it's YouTubers, TikTokers, it's a lot of people who have prominence for the sake of having prominence. And my last podcast guest, Gary Files, I need to introduce him to, he also mentions the word post-truth, and he said the dilution of the word began for him personally with the birth of copywriting. It was so interesting. He said, like, we at some point went away from holy people honoring the word and passing on earned wisdom in order to make things better, and to transition to this kind of content for the sake of lead generation, or like influence in itself. And where do you see we are in a climate of truth, and how do we can potentially return back to our foundations of speaking for the sake of accelerating enlightenment rather than personal enrichment?
Well, the good news is that, like bad ideas have a tendency of killing themselves. And there are not that many good ideas. There is this long continuity, right? Like if you look at it, Christianity is a fork of Judaism, and Islam is basically a fork of Christianity. Like Jesus is a prophet in the Quran, right? Like all of these things have like this long continuity of evolution. Like there are no revolutions here. It's continuity, right? So whatever, if I'm going to make a prediction, like the future is going to be basically a continuation of these fundamental philosophies and religions that we've known from the past. I don't think the world has changed so much that we're going to see something completely new, something completely different. Instead, we might see some variations on the things that already exist, right? Like, for example, something that has changed is basically the technological mastery of the natural environment, right? So for example, when you look at the religions of animists, like even in contemporary Siberia, you're gonna see animistic beliefs. There's so much about maintaining the ecosystem, about respecting different living beings and species and so on, right? Like it's about not killing your environment, right? Because if you're a hunter, like it's very easy to just kill your environment and then starve because you've killed the last mammoth. So now there are no more mammoths, and you might be able to catch a rabbit, but it's not good life anymore. I mean, it was Neanderthals that did like, in industrial scale bullion production in Germany out of mammoth valves, like whatever, a couple of 100,000 years ago, right? And now there are no more mammoths, right? Like so the take everything that you can, pretty much destroyed a bunch of species that humans kind of relied on. So animists were the survivors that had respect for the environment, that kind of protected this environment, right? But then with the beginning of farming, this was less of a concern. With farming, you weren't destroying the natural environment. You were kind of like planting your own things, and the danger really became the other tribes. So there were so many wars between them that say the religions of Christianity and Islam were about unifying people, so that there are fewer wars.